In 1692, a town has become overrun by witches. This town is Salem, Massachusetts, and today I will be diving into a little history of what happened during that time. I believe this story is very important because it gives us a little bit of history and shows us just a little bit of how groupthink and mob mentality can have drastic consequences. I have always been fascinated by witchcraft and the history surrounding it. So, first, I will discuss what sparked the events. And second, we will cover who the accused were. Finally, I will tell you what happened to the accused. So, sit tight and listen while I tell you the story of how two young girls sparked an event that jailed many and killed 20. There are two things to note before we get into the story. According to Allard, almost everyone in Salem at the time was a Puritan. Puritans believed heavily in the devil and believed that he did his work through witchcraft. The second thing is that science and medicine were not very developed in this time, and as a result, anything that couldn't be explained symptom wise was diagnosed as bewitchment. In January 1692, some girls started getting together in the home of Samuel Parris. According to Billings, Samuel's daughter Elizabeth Parris and Abigail Williams, his niece, ages 9 and 11, were interested in witchcraft and the house slave Tibuta. Tibuta had lots of voodoo stories that she would share with the girls, and soon after, the girls started acting strangely. Upham says they would start having hallucinations. They would start convulsing and screaming, and after being seen by the doctor, he couldn't figure out what was going on with the girls, so he proceeded to diagnose them as bewitched. The town started pressuring the girls to name who was causing this behavior. The very next month, the girls started naming names. The first three women accused didn't really have a strong standing in the community. According to Allard, it was Tibuta, the house slave, who was telling the girls voodoo stories, Sarah Good, a homeless woman who was making her living begging door to door, and Sarah Osborne, who was a bedridden elderly lady. While the majority of people accused were women, there were instances where children and men were also arrested. Two examples being Sarah Good's 4-year-old daughter and Giles Corey, an 80-year-old man. There are many sources that state different numbers for just how many were accused. The rough estimate everywhere is somewhere between 200 and 300 men, women, and children. So we know who was accused, but what happened to those people? The accused had trials. They had no lawyers, no judges. They had no training on judging people fairly. The courts were very much stacked against them. They used any evidence, no matter how trivial, to prove guilt, including spectral evidence, which is where the victims would say the accused appeared to them through a vision or a dream. According to Allard, it became common for most to confess to being witches to avoid a death sentence and serve prison time instead. If the accused were found guilty and never confessed, they were sentenced to death. Those sentences accounted for 20 deaths, all by hanging, except one. Giles Corey refused to stand trial. And to quote Allard, the punishment for not standing trial was being crushed to death under rocks. It took Corey, who was in his 80s, 2 full days to die. End quote. That's not to say the only people sentenced to death died. Many records show 13 other accused died while in prison. Once the courts decided to stop using spectral evidence, though, they didn't really have a strong basis to find people guilty anymore, and everyone left in prison was set free. So that is the condensed version of what transpired in Salem, Massachusetts. There is so much more history behind it and theories for why it happened. Today we discussed what sparked the event. The Puritan lifestyle had a big influence on what happened because they felt the devil was at work. Secondly, we covered who was the accused. They were everyone, mainly women, but men and children were also involved. Finally, I shared information about what happened to the accused. We discussed how some were killed, but most went to prison. It's amazing how much credit a town gave 2 little girls back then. How those girls affected the lives of so many people is incredible. While we don't know exactly what was going on in Salem or what caused the girls to act the way they did, we do know is a dark part of our history that shouldn't be repeated.